Usual phrase, let's draw a line under it and talk about poverty, or Gordon Brown warning that rising prices are pushing many more people into poverty. He has a solution, which is to have another budget. He wants Rishi Sunak to come back to the Commons probably by the summer. Let's have a listen to what the former Prime Minister had to say.
I see millions of families in poverty and millions of children going to school ill-clad and hungry, people unable to afford to put up their heating. Now, something has got to be done about this, and it has to be done in a far fairer way than the previous three budgets. That's why I'm pressing. You may have had three budgets, and that may seem enough, but you're going to have a fourth budget. It's absolutely essential, not just to deal with family poverty, but to show a pathway forward to growth, including stable prices.
Well, I didn't mean to interrupt you there, Gordon Brown, but I think we got the thrust of it. John, is he right? Do we need... It's essential, he said, to have a fourth budget. Obviously, Rishi Sunak will come back in the autumn, but one before then.
Well, that was going to be my response, which is Rishi Sunak is going to do a fourth budget. There'll be one in the autumn. And bear in mind as well that some of the things he's already announced haven't yet come in. So, for example, on the 6th of July, the national insurance threshold is about to go up by a very big amount, and the taper rate for universal credit is about to be reduced. Both of those will make a huge amount of difference to the lowest paid in society, making sure they can hang on to more of the money that they've earned.
Miatta?
So I don't think he's done enough. I think the intervention that he did a few weeks ago was important because he hadn't acted for so long, so there was a sigh of relief. But if you take the fact that, you know, people on benefits on average will be getting £1,000, that basically just reversed the cut to universal credit that he did last autumn, which was completely foolhardy and short-sighted. It doesn't account for the fact that our social security system has been hacked out for about a decade, which is why it feels so precarious for people. There is no cushion because they were already on the edge. And then you have the absolutely phenomenal price rises that we're seeing when, you know, the government's own economic watchdog is saying biggest squeeze in living standards for 50 years. And it doesn't feel like the Chancellor's acting in step with that. So I think he should be coming back because he's done a little bit, needs to do a lot, particularly for families at the lower end. But, you know, when the average basket's going up by £2,300 in 1 year, I think even the families not on benefits are also really being squeezed. Those in the middle, and that £400 for our energy bills that may or may not filter through to our bills we don't know, is just not enough. And he had the chance to use that windfall tax in quite an expansive way in order to protect families in the middle, and he didn't do that. So I think he's going to be under a fair bit of pressure to come back.
Should he come back sooner than the autumn, Anne?
No, I think, you know, the autumn is fine. I mean, we're already at the end of June, or towards the end of June. I don't see why we shouldn't wait for his full budget. What I would say is this, yeah, there's a cost of living crisis, and that does mean that everybody's worse off, absolutely everybody. And in these situations, the government has two very clear responsibilities. The first is to protect the very poorest. That it does have a responsibility to. And the second thing it's got to do, and this is where my big argument with the government comes in, is to take the economic measures that will provide the longer-term solution to this, as Mrs. Thatcher did when she came in '79. And it wasn't done overnight. It wasn't done by the middle of Tuesday afternoon. And I think we've got into the habit now of expecting the government to solve things very quickly. And no government, doesn't matter which party it is, which country it is.
12 years isn't quickly, is it?
And I also think we should look at what is happening in the rest of the Western world. We often tease the Americans for being insular. I think Britain's pretty insular. We tend to think these are just our problems. These are global problems.
Well, and it's interesting, you say they're global problems, and there hasn't been enough time, perhaps, to solve some of these structural problems. I could hear Sarah saying, well, we've had a Conservative government of various stripes since 2010, and also some of the latest...
COVID was 2019.
Oh. Well, all right, well, let's put that.
These things were not just caused by COVID. It is a complete argument, a complete misrepresentation of what has happened. We have had very low growth. If you compare average growth under the last Labour government and under this 12 years of Conservative government, it is significantly lower under this Conservative government. Now, of course, the Chancellor was right to introduce the measures that he did. He accepted our argument on windfall tax, which was good, although there were some flaws in it. For example, you know, giving energy support to people with 2 or 3 or 4 homes, which was a waste of money. But we do need, of course, you know, the cost of living crisis is affecting people right now. People, exactly as Miatta says, are exactly on the edge. There's no flex. People don't have savings. So if you had an emergency budget, if you could increase benefits in line line with inflation, if you could introduce business rates for small businesses, if you could support those businesses that are really high energy intensive, as Labour have suggested, with a £600 million fund so that you could make sure they can continue operating. If you could cut VAT on energy, you could do some short-term things. Now, in the long term, I agree with Anne. Of course, we need a long-term policy. We're going to add one for 12 years. Where's the industrial strategy? Where's the climate change growth strategy? Well, how are we increasing our renewables? How are we getting the country skilled up?
Let me get John to respond
again?
before I come back to Anne. What's your response to that?
So I think that that Anne is absolutely right to say that you have some short-term requirements, but you've also got to fix the longer-term issues. Otherwise, all you end up doing is treating the symptoms of rising costs of living and of poverty rather than dealing with the underlying causes. And you can't spend your way through that. You've actually got to try and deal with the underlying things that are driving all of this. So, for example, there's a skills and apprenticeship bill which is already been announced, which will make a huge difference to opportunity in this country, to skills and abilities. And there's as I mentioned before, there's a bill designed to reduce the deadweight cost of government regulations without compromising standards in order to make our
and what about
economy
tax
more
cuts,
nimble.
which a lot of your colleagues are calling for?
And so I already mentioned that we've already got a tax cut which is due on the 6th of July.
And they're talking about going further.
And I would love to be able to go further, but bear in mind as well that you've got to be, as well, the party of sound money. You can't borrow your way to prosperity.
Well, so the problem with tax cuts is that it will always benefit those at the top far more than those at the bottom.
It depends how you do them.
Most tax measures will do that, and it will be disproportionate. And for me, I completely
17 times.
I completely agree with the point about reform. And so, where is the reform of the energy market? It's been broken for a very long time, and it's more broken now because
I was about to add that one. You're absolutely right.
we have consolidation.
Yeah.
The government could be putting lots of money into home insulation, a national programme to retrofit our homes. That would have a massive impact now and in the short term. And in the end, that safety net that's been hacked away at, it's got to be restored. Why are we not putting more money? I would want to see 17 billion going into social security that would start to reduce some of the damage. Then you give people that floor, you give people that security, and then you build from that. And then we've got to, we talked about wages at the start of this. We have had stagnating wages for well over 10 years. And at some point, we've got to try and shift that. So those are the big issues. And unfortunately, I hear the government talking about anything but those core issues that it ought to be trying to tackle.
Well, let's talk about potholes.